Hello, and welcome back to the Imperfection Wellness Podcast, where we dive deep into the concepts that help us find peace, contentment, and the freedom from the endless chatter of our thoughts. And I'm your host, Scott Possley, and in our prior episodes, we discussed awareness and attachment. And today, we're exploring the third concept of Possley's paradigm, which is acceptance. Before we begin, I recommend you go to imperfectionwellness.com to view and print a copy of Possley's Paradigm. You can download it for free, and that way you can reference it at any time. But that being said, let's get back to acceptance. So we've all had moments where the weight of the world seems like it's too much to bear, where we find ourselves trapped in endless cycles of worry, regret. Maybe you've experienced times where you can't stop thinking about the past. You relive things you wish you had done differently. Or maybe you spend hours, even days, feeling anxious about what the future might hold. You rehearse different scenarios in your brain and your mind. You're trying to control outcomes that are ultimately outside of your grasp, outside of your control. And this is what I like to call storytelling and time traveling. We create these elaborate narratives in our minds, and then we time travel between the past and the future. But what happens when we do that? We're missing out on the only thing that's real, this present moment. Acceptance helps us break free from this cycle of time traveling and storytelling. It's the ability to say, this is where I am. This is what's happening. I may not like it, but I'm not going to fight it. Additionally, I want to be clear, acceptance does not mean giving up or throwing in the towel. It means we acknowledge reality as it is. And for the past, we acknowledge it for what it was. And for the future, we're going to acknowledge it for what it'll be. It doesn't mean we don't care. It means we're sitting in the muck saying, I know this too shall pass. And certain things are within my control, but many things aren't. And I'm going to sit in acceptance. The reason we sit in acceptance is because when we resist what is, we suffer. And then we add layers of pain by wishing things were different or by clinging to the belief that if I had just acted differently in the past, or if I could just control everything perfectly in the future, then somehow life would be better. But life is filled with so many variables, so many things that are outside of our control. And when we stop fighting those variables, when we sit in acceptance of them, that's when we find freedom. That's when we find liberation. There's another essential aspect of acceptance that I want to touch on, and that's the concept of impermanence. And I love impermanence because it's that realization that everything in life is fleeting, everything in life is temporary. No matter what you're going through, whether it's a challenging situation, a moment of pure joy, it too shall pass. Nothing is permanent. The only constant in life is change. And many of you have heard the phrase, this too shall pass. And when we truly embrace this, it brings us a sense of peace. Because impermanence teaches us not to cling to the highs or to resist the lows. When we accept that life is always changing, that moments are fleeting, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. It doesn't mean we stop caring. It doesn't mean we stop trying. It reminds us that whatever we're facing, it won't last forever. Tying in with impermanence are the ideas of non-attachment, non-judgment, and non-resistance. And when we talk about non-attachment, we're not saying that we shouldn't care about anything or anyone. What we mean is that we stop trying to tie our sense of self-worth or happiness to external things. And we talked about this in the last episode. Whether that's material possessions, relationships, outcomes. This non-attachment allows us to enjoy the present moment without becoming so dependent on it. And it frees us from clinging. It frees us to do what we want and not fearing that next right action, whatever that next right action will be. Lessening the fear because we know this too shall pass. The concept of non-judgment means that we stop labeling our experiences as good or bad. They just are. But so often when something happens, our immediate response is to judge it. Oh, this is great. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, this is horrible. Oh, this is wonderful. But when we bring in the concept of non-judgment, we start accepting what is without assigning any value to it. It doesn't mean we don't enjoy it. It just means we're not assigning value. We can observe life without labeling it, without rating it. That rating and that labeling is that ego. And when we're able to observe without judgment, rating, comparison, we become more grounded in the present moment. Additionally, non-resistance is about letting go of the need to fight our reality. That concept of non-resistance. I call these three the trifecta: non-resistance, non-attachment, non-judgment, and it all ties in beautifully with impermanence. With non-resistance, we stop resisting what's happening in the present moment. Think of the analogy of like if you're swimming in a river, a strong stream. When we resist, we exhaust ourselves because we're trying to swim upstream. We're fighting the current. We think we know what's best, and that's our intellect. And we need our intellect. I'm not saying don't use your intellect, but there are certain times where we go beyond or transcend our intellect and we stop resisting. We begin to flow with the current. We find our peace and comfort in this present moment. I always said, not only drop the oars. Someone said that to me years ago. They're like, oh, drop the oars. I said, jump out of the boat. Like, literally be the water. Let the current take you. Yes, when we put our effort into it and when we plan, things still pay off. But when we practice these concepts and all coming back to acceptance, things may go a little differently than expected. And we start to appreciate and realize that's okay. That's the flow of life. When we practice non-attachment, non-judgment, and non-resistance, we come back to acceptance. And this is liberating. We're no longer carrying that heavy burden of trying to control every aspect or trying to change what we cannot change or trying to live someone else's life through loving control. I heard the concept of loving control probably about a year ago. And basically, while the intent is good, you're trying to control a situation saying, well, if I lived their life, I would do it this way. But we're all on our own unique journey. So instead of loving control, we shift that and we offer love and support, knowing impermanence, appreciating non-attachment, non-judgment, and non-resistance. And we start to live more freely because we know that whatever comes our way, it'll pass and it'll be okay. We're ready for that next experience, always in the present moment, though. And with acceptance, at its core, it's the recognition that life is a series of changing moments. We don't control the vast majority of what happens, but we do control how we respond. And when we choose to respond with acceptance, that's where we find our true freedom. And it is a challenge. Sitting in acceptance is a challenge. So often we use our intellect. And it's interesting because when we don't accept the past, we have these ruminating thoughts as if our intellect can quote unquote fix it. And so often I would find myself replaying events in my mind over and over, thinking if only I had done this, or damn it, I should have said that. Well, these are the regrets that keep us stuck in the past. They pull us out of the present moment. They prevent us from truly living our authentic lives in the here and now. And then when we look to the future, what we worry about with the future creates its own problems. Stress, anxiety, what's going to happen? We try to predict and plan for every nuanced outcome. And if we think to ourselves, you know what? I'm going to anticipate everything and I'm going to avoid any disappointment, any failure. This constant rumination about the future is going to keep us anxious and stressed. It pulls us out of that present moment. And yes, we plan. Yes, we have strategies for the future. But we don't do it with the mindset that if I plan it down to the nth detail, it'll be perfect. And once it's perfect, I'll be happy. That's the difference. It's fine tuning it. And I hope you understand the difference. Yes, I still plan for my trip that's coming up. But when the plane gets delayed, I sit in acceptance because that's out of my control. It doesn't mean I like that my plane's delayed, but it doesn't mean that the world's coming to an end. We find that balance and we center ourselves and come back to present moment. That's one of the curveballs that life throws us. And there's no way we can outsmart every variable. Because the more we try to control things that are beyond our influence, our control, the more we suffer. And I said this earlier, I just want to be very clear that acceptance does not mean we give up. It doesn't mean that we stop planning or stop trying or stop putting forth effort. It means we move forward with this understanding that there's going to be variables outside of our control. We do our best, but we let go of the idea that we can control every outcome. We'll talk more about this in upcoming episodes, but this concept of not being able to control, not being able to predict, brings us to two other concepts within Possley's paradigm, which is surrender and letting go. So again, we'll talk more about that, but if you have your copy of the paradigm, you can take a look ahead. So knowing that acceptance is about acknowledging this reality, surrendering, letting go about releasing that emotional charge that comes with resisting our reality. But again, we'll dive deeper into that. I want to share a personal story with you, and it was based off of a video I saw online with a wellness expert who challenged his students to sit in full acceptance of everything exactly as it is, as it was, as it will be. Sit in full acceptance for 24 hours. Sounds so simple, right? I thought it was too. And he said, as simple as this sounds, it'll be one of the hardest things you'll ever try. So I decided to give it a go. I'll try this out for an afternoon. And I gotta tell you, it was one of the most challenging exercises I've ever done. Every little thing that went wrong, every tiny inconvenience, I just sat there in acceptance. Everything from my past, where I was in the present moment, what I was worried about in the future, letting all that go and sitting in full acceptance, no resistance, and not letting myself spiral into frustration, not letting myself go into a blame or a victim or a martyr mentality. And I didn't do it straight through per se, like there were still lapses. But by the end of the day, I did have this sense of relief. Now, I'm a meditator. I advocate meditation. I advocate bringing meditation into your wellness practice. I teach two techniques, a free technique and a paid technique. I highly recommend go to imperfectionwellness.com, look at the offerings. I think they're instrumental in helping center yourself within these steps of the paradigm. And the reason I say that is because during this kind of 24-hour period of sitting in acceptance, I know my meditation practice helped me immensely. And over time, I tied them together of sitting in acceptance and then using the meditation to transcend and go beyond that egoic thought that said, trouble's around the corner, you should have regret about yesterday, I'm going to keep you in the past and future. And through meditation, I was able to come back to the present moment, kind of anchoring myself back to present moment, because I sat for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes once or twice a day. I meditate 20 minutes twice a day, by the way, so not everybody's going to, nor do you need to. But definitely my goal is to always find ways to help people on their wellness journey. So definitely I'm always going to plug meditation. But in that space, I found calm. And it didn't mean I liked everything that happened, but I no longer fought against it. And that was amazing. Tying in with acceptance is, yes, we know sitting in acceptance can be challenging. And so often we seem to resist it. And I keep asking myself, why? Why is there such resistance? And again, my opinion, but I believe this answer lies in how our brains are wired. Whenever you kind of come to wellness and awareness and these concepts, you likely have years and years of lived experiences that no one's explained it like this or no one's addressed it like this. And so we have these years of behaviors, of thoughts, of reactions, and they follow these patterns that we have. And these patterns are called neural pathways. This is my interpretation. I think of these pathways being like grooves in the brain. They're kind of formed by repetitive thoughts and actions over time. And it's kind of like a shortcut for the brain. It's just like, oh, when X happens, then I'll do Y. I don't need to think. It's like an automatic pattern. And the more we repeat these behaviors, the more we repeat the pattern, the deeper the groove comes, and it makes it easier for the brain to follow that path. And think back to a trigger. Think back to something that activates you. Why is that? Probably because of that shortcut. Your brain is following the path of least resistance. And if you've spent years reacting with frustration to setbacks, as an example, your brain has likely created a neural pathway or a shortcut that associates challenges with anger or resistance. So when something goes wrong, what's your default mode? Your brain defaults to that response. And for me, it was frustration and anger when things didn't go as planned. Sometimes an emotional meltdown could happen. But the beauty of this is, one, we bring awareness to it. Again, concept one of the paradigm, we bring awareness. And we know that our brains are capable of changing. This concept called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to form new neural pathways. And when we become aware of our patterns, when we realize that we're resisting acceptance, and we're now aware, we now have the power to create new, healthier patterns. I sometimes call out to myself, old neural pathway. I don't say it out loud and I don't say it in groups of people, but I just become aware that this automatic response can be made. I can, one, be aware of it, two, question it, and then three, use some mindful breathing, use some meditation, and try to create a new pathway, a different pathway. We're able to do that. Think of creating a new neural pathway being like carving a new groove in the brain. At first, it's going to take some effort and intention for sure, because you have to consciously choose to respond differently, to sit in acceptance rather than resistance. But with practice, that new groove becomes deeper, and over time, it's easier for your brain to follow that path. For me, I used to get frustrated and angry so quickly, and now, even if I do, it's not as intense, and I'm aware of it quicker. And then once I'm aware, I'm like, oh wait, I can have a different response to this. And it does work. The key to creating these new habits is simple awareness. Catching yourself resisting the reality And you might not catch it in the moment. You might catch it a day or two later or a week later. But being aware is great because you're noticing your actions. And now I notice it in the moment. And sometimes I notice it before the moment. I can feel an energy shift or a response in my body. I'm like, oh, there we go. There's an activation. There's that response coming up. I don't need to have that response anymore. We can make a conscious choice to accept what is. And the more we practice it, the more natural it becomes. And when we look at developing the habit of acceptance, we can move into that next step, surrender. And again, we're going to talk about this more in a future episode, but looking at surrender as releasing the need to control everything. That even when things don't go according to plan, it's going to be okay. We trust in that. And letting go being so closely tied to surrender, letting go is about releasing the emotional attachment we have to outcomes, to expectations, to how we think things should be. And when we let go, we free ourselves from this emotional burden of trying to control the uncontrollable. Without acceptance, I don't think we can truly surrender or let go. But it also starts with awareness. So that's why these concepts all tie into each other. And once we start learning and understanding acceptance, it makes the rest so much easier. I want to kind of pivot into a concept that I heard about so many years ago, and I'm just like, whatever. I totally negated it. And through this wellness journey, awareness journey, creating Possley's paradigm, it kept coming up. And that concept is we are the sum total of our choices up to this point in our life. And when I first heard that, I'm like, what? I was furious. I always thought I was a victim of circumstance or a pawn of bad luck or maybe a martyr. I didn't consciously choose it, but that's how I felt on a subconscious level. That was my response. And I always thought that I was just being swept along by the tides of life. But instead, what I realized is I had a hand in shaping my experiences. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow. So you might need to sit with that. But yes, we are all the sum total of our choices up to this point in our life. Choosing to go left or right, whether you realized it, you chose to go left or right. And choosing to stay stalled and not do anything, you inadvertently were choosing that. And that's not a critique. It's just bringing awareness that we have more input into our lives than we realize. And for so many years, I framed it mentally to myself that I was at the mercy of all these external factors. Blaming your upbringing, relationships, blaming the economy, the weather. If something went wrong, I could point outward. I could point my finger and deflect that responsibility. And I clung to the belief that my struggles were a result of forces beyond my control. But as I began to deepen my awareness and sit with acceptance, I realized something so transformative. I made choices all along the way. Some choices were wonderful. Some not so much. But the important part was that I made them. And it was in this realization, this recognition that I made this choice, that everything began to shift. Because when we sit in acceptance, we come face to face with the fact that our choices have shaped our journey. It's so humbling. And at times it's uncomfortable and it's a hard truth to accept. But that's why we sit in acceptance. And for me, it meant admitting that I wasn't just the innocent victim of bad luck. I contributed to where I stood in life. And again, I had a very prosperous, successful life on paper. My issue was I didn't feel it. That was my constant struggle. And it's not that I was ungrateful, but that was the conundrum. On the outside, I had everything, but on the inside, I was just emotionally lost. And that's why I have such passion around this paradigm because we can look at anyone we want to and make an assumption, but we have no idea what's going on inside. But regardless, there were situations that I chose to stay in. Maybe it was a bad job, maybe it was in a bad relationship, but I made the choice to stay without realizing it. I made the choice to overeat, to drink to the point of numbing myself. These were my choices. And while that was difficult at first, it eventually became so empowering and a wonderful realization. And this understanding shifted my perspective on personal responsibility. Because with that shift, I saw the power that had been within me all along. Yes, I made choices. Sometimes ones I would now do very differently. But I don't ruminate on that. I sit in acceptance that that's the choice you made. And that's part of your journey. And the real power comes that we acknowledge we did the best we could at the time. We are doing the best we can at the time with the information we had, with the awareness we have right now. We'll talk about forgiveness later as well, another concept of the paradigm. We forgive ourselves. This is the essence of acceptance. It doesn't mean excusing ourselves or brushing off past mistakes. It doesn't mean, we throw caution to the wind. It means we acknowledge that we made a choice at the time. We made the best decisions we could with the knowledge, the emotional state, the experiences we had. And with this new awareness, I learned that the only real wrong choice is not making any choice at all and then sitting in resentment about it and wondering why nothing has changed. The practice of acceptance invites us to forgive ourselves for the decisions or actions of the past. Decisions that might seem misguided or flawed, but that's because we have the benefit of hindsight. And again, I won't lie to you, this was hard for me. When I began looking back on my life with this newfound clarity, I was flooded with regret. I replayed moments in my mind where I so wished I had acted differently or spoken up or walked away or not drank so much in my case. But as much as I wanted to rewrite these moments, I couldn't. The past was set in stone. And at first I resisted this. I held on so tightly to these regrets. And I guess I thought by doing so, I'd somehow punish myself into making better choices in the future. No. All that did was create more suffering. The more I fought against my past decisions, the more powerless I felt. And finally, one day I felt the shift. I sat in acceptance of the choices I made, the good ones, the bad ones, and I realized I was still here. I had learned from these choices. I had survived. I made it. I did it. And because I awakened to this new level of awareness, I could now make different choices. I wasn't stuck in old patterns. I wasn't defined by my past. And this awareness I gained through this journey of acceptance felt like a light shining on the path ahead, illuminating new possibilities, unknown possibilities. And I started feeling the many blessings that I had. That was the shift. I started realizing what I had, and the outside started matching the inside. That was so huge for me. I didn't have to fake it. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to slap on a smile. I didn't have to have a couple of shots before I went out to feel comfortable in my skin. And there's so much more awareness and so much more acceptance in just doing that next right action. This was profoundly liberating for me. My past no longer held me captive. I could accept it for what it was. It was a collection of choices I made with the best of my ability. And with that acceptance came the freedom to create a different future. The choices I make are now mine. make choices with this awareness. They're fully mine. And that's incredibly empowering. When we accept our past choices, we're no longer bound by them. We can look back without judgment, knowing that we did the best we could at the time. And now, with our expanded awareness, we can move forward with an intention. We can make conscious decisions that align with who we are today. And we sit in acceptance of this, forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, knowing we're all human, we're all fallible. And this frees us from the weight of regret. It empowers us to step into this present moment with clarity and purpose. Because through acceptance, we gain the awareness and the power to choose differently. And one thing I just have to be very clear about is that it's so important to remember that this process is ongoing. We stumble, we fall, we stumble, we fall, and we get back up. We keep getting back up. We continue to make new choices each and every day. Some will be aligned with our higher selves, our true self. That's great. Some will still come from ego or that fear, that voice that says you can't, you're not good enough, you should have, you shouldn't have. If should ever comes onto the radar, you know you're an ego. You know that egoic thought, that egoic voice has come into play. But as long as we remain aware, as long as we're willing to accept our choices without judgment, without blame, we continue to grow, we continue to evolve. This is the path to acceptance. It's a path that asks us to let go of the past, embrace the present, and trust ourselves as we move into the future. And in closing, acceptance isn't about liking everything that happens. That's just not realistic. That's just not possible. We're going to resonate with different people differently, in different situations differently. And there are tragedies in the world. There are horrific things happening. It doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean we like it. But whatever has come before it has allowed this situation to take place. And there are modern day atrocities that are happening that are overwhelming to me. And all that I can say is unaware humans, people who are not aware of what's going on, we have allowed this to happen because it wouldn't have reached that point otherwise. Can I change it in the immediate here and now? Maybe. But if I can't, then I acknowledge that reality without resistance. Again, it doesn't mean I like it, especially when there's atrocities going on. It's about finding your peace and centering the present moment so that no matter what it looks like, you're able to act and perform that next right action, which is the 9th concept in the paradigm. But before we get to there, we focus on these steps one by one and we practice acceptance. We open ourselves to the next steps. We surrender to what is. We let go of the need to control everything. But we also can use our voice and our actions to influence the future and make the changes, the necessary changes that are needed. It's not apathy. Again, it doesn't mean we sit in inaction. I started writing a book on the paradigm many years ago, and I stopped writing it because I didn't have an ending. And that ending finally came. Action. Next right action. Another anchor point for the paradigm, that 9th concept. We don't sit in inaction. We act today through the lens of awareness so that we can influence and change tomorrow and change these atrocities. I really hope today's episode gave you a new perspective on acceptance and how it can honestly transform your life. And remember, this is a practice. It's not a light switch that you turn on and it's always there. It's something we work on, and we work on day by day, moment by moment. And again, if you want to learn a meditation technique to help you through this, I'd love to teach you. Again, imperfectionwellness.com, and the link is in the show notes. In our next episode, we're going to dive into the next concept, be the observer. And Be the Observer is about stepping back from our thoughts and emotions to see them for what they truly are. Just passing experiences. They are not who we are, but they are aspects of us. And by learning to observe our thoughts and feelings without attaching to identification with them, we create a space for inner calm and clarity, for some peace, for some quiet. Separating from those thousands of thoughts. And Be the Observer allows us to recognize patterns in our thinking and break free from some of these automatic reactions and make some more conscious choices. It's just a powerful step toward living in the present moment, which is what it's all about. Coming back to that true self, deepening our self-awareness, helping us find even greater peace and freedom in the here and now. So, as always, thank you for listening. It's really enjoyable to kind of share these concepts that are age-old and timeless, but to put them in this framework and use this as a roadmap has been instrumental in changing my life, and I wish that for you. So, as always, thank you and wishing you the best on your wellness journey.